All right, welcome to In Transit for this Tuesday. Is now really the time to get off the fence and buy a car before tariffs hit us hard? Let's find out. Benjamin Wenger's with us. He's co-founder of Autos Consultants. He's on the line. Benjamin, welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Elias. Always great to be here.
First things first, before we get to the tariff story, I do want to touch upon this because there was a story last month that came out that the government of Canada had frozen $43 million in rebate payments for Tesla. And apparently Tesla had put through a bunch of these, the $5,000 federal rebates. They put in a bunch at one shot. And people are saying, ooh, these may not be on the up and up. Or maybe these are not real, true sales. What can you just tell us about that? And then Canada saying that they're not going to include Tesla in future programs.
So this is a crazy news item that just passed by my desk that Tesla reported 8,600 vehicle sales in a 3-day period leading up to the conclusion of the IZEV program, which is that $5,000 rebate that you just mentioned from the federal government. So the federal government had earmarked $71 million in funds for this program, and Tesla ate $43 million of the $71 million in a weekend, basically.
So, but do we have an explanation here? Like some people are saying, well, this means Tesla was cooking the books. What do we know on that front?
I believe they were cooking the books. There definitely was a huge rush of people. So Quebec ended their Rouler Vert program in December, and the federal government ended their IZEV program in January. So there was a huge influx. I had a huge influx of clientele looking for electric vehicles at the end of the year and the start of this year to try to maximize the credits that were available to them. I have a few speculations as to what Tesla did in order to try to pass this through. And it's very common for dealerships to register vehicles to themselves. And they use those vehicles as courtesy cars, or they use those vehicles to prop up their sales for the month. Mm-hmm. So I believe that Tesla did the same. I think they were very greedy in what they did. Had they done a handful of vehicles, they would have got away with it, with the idea that the incentive would then stay with the vehicle and then they could pass that incentive on to the consumer as the program expires.
Is it possible that they just didn't file paperwork in the months prior and then they just did everything in one shot? I've heard that as a possible explanation.
It seems very unlikely, especially because they did this over the course of a weekend. So it's possible that they, had some grunts do all the paperwork over the course of the weekend, or maybe they built some sort of automated tool in order to do so. But I personally don't think, I know firsthand that the demand for Teslas is going down across the board. You can watch the stock price. About 15 months ago, it was trading for about $500 a share. Now it's down to $250 a share. I don't want to make this about politics, but unfortunately the CEO of Tesla has become a bit of a lightning rod and a huge face of the administration in the United States. And there's a lot of backlash towards them. Yeah. So as much interest as I had in electric vehicles at the end of last year, it wasn't for Teslas. It was for Chevys, it was for Hyundais, it was for Audis and Volkswagens.
Did all sales
want Teslas right now?
But did all sales drop in January? Because I heard a report, Tesla sales in Canada dropped 70% in January, right? With these rebates going away. And then I heard that overall electric vehicles also dropped. One measure I heard was 79% in Canada because all of these rebates went away. So are all EV sales hurting right now because of the lack of rebates?
I think people are waiting. I don't know if you've seen, but the Quebec government has announced that the Rouler Vert program is coming back. It used to be a maximum of $7,000. Now they're going to offer a maximum of $4,000, depending on the channel and the price of the vehicle that you're going for. Mm-hmm. So for sure, people that were on the fence about electric vehicles got off the fence knowing that the programs were ending. And there's still a huge number of people that are still skeptical about making the transition to EV. And that incentive really did help push people in that direction. With no incentive right now, it's a much tougher sell for sure.
So let me ask you on the bigger issue here, and that is tariffs on automobiles. And everyone keeps telling me, well, this is going to be a lot of pain, $3,000, $6,000, $10,000, depending on the vehicle. What should our listeners know if they're looking at buying a car? Should they be acting because of everything happening with the U.S. to buy sooner than later?
So right now, the United States has said that they are going to put a tariff on vehicles that are imported into their country. Canada has not come out with a reciprocal tariff, certainly not towards automotive. I personally hope that they do not bring out a reciprocal tariff for cars made in the United States because so many of these vehicles made in the United States have components that come from Canada, and ultimately it will hurt the Canadian economy, in my opinion, to tariff our own product adjacent items as well as push up the price of vehicles in this country, which will, again, push up inflation, lower the value of the Canadian currency, which will hurt our buying power for other things that are made in other countries. Mm-hmm. So it's a 25% tariff that's going to be put in place on cars that are not made in the United States. They still have not really been clear about what they're going to do with the vehicles that are made in Canada or made in the United States that contain a high percentage of components that come from either or country. So for cars that are made, there's a lot of cars that are made in Ontario for people that don't know that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the components that are made there, to go from, let's say, Windsor, Ontario to Detroit is like driving from Montreal to Laval. It can be done there and back in an afternoon, and a lot of components will go across the border 5, 6, 7 times before the car is complete. So they've never really tracked the final location or assembly of these parts that go back and forth across the border because it hasn't been an issue since NAFTA, and that's been part of the process of building these cars. So yes, the final assembly of, let's say, your air conditioning unit in your car might be done in the United States, but a lot of the wiring or the casing might have come from Windsor or from Oshawa, so it's really difficult to monitor. The Trump administration has been very unclear in terms of what they're going to do with what percentage of the car came from Canada versus came from the United States, came from Mexico. They're saying maybe cars from Canada are only going to have a 10% tariff as opposed to a 25% tariff. BMW is the first brand to actually make an announcement, but this doesn't apply to us in Canada. It's for the United States, that as of May 1st, their entry-level car, the 230i, which has an MSRP of $39,600, is going to go up to $41,200, which is a $1,600 increase, or roughly a 3-4% increase in price. But that's a German-made car going to United States.
It's interesting that we haven't heard more brands just be vocal about it. Say, and it also help them juice sales, at least in the short term, because we really don't know what will happen at the end of the day. But I'm surprised more brands aren't saying, hey, as of May 1st, price is going to this. You should buy now. It is interesting that we haven't heard maybe some brands trying to take advantage of, the urgency. I know urgency pushes people to buy.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, all the brands are usually very guarded in terms of they only give out information on a need-to-know basis. So whatever program, whatever incentive they're going to offer in April is going to come out in the next few hours, and they're going to keep the consumers blind in terms of what's going to happen for May. And a lot of that is determined based on sales information and market day supply. So if they see that there's a ton of a certain model on the lots, then the OEMs, the manufacturers are going to say to the dealers, okay, we're going to give you guys an extra $1,000 per unit to liquidate these cars, or we're going to lower the interest rate to 0.9%. Over the last few years, because the inventory has been so low due to COVID and supply chain issues, we haven't had a lot of incentive in the market.
Let me ask you, over at Autos Consultants, someone's coming to you and they're saying, okay, should I buy now? What's that advice you're giving to them?
I always preach caution. So really the question is, is your lease coming due, or have you outgrown your vehicle, or is your needs completely changed? If the answer to those 3 questions is yes, then now is the time to buy. If your car still works, there's no rush to get a new car ever. It's obviously going to be a huge expense, so it just comes down to, do you need to make that decision? It's really difficult to say what's going to happen in the marketplace. If Canada is going to put reciprocal tariffs in, is it the responsibility of a potentially outgoing government to put tariffs in? Would those tariffs last past the election on April 28th? It's a very difficult time to know exactly what's going to happen to the prices of cars in Canada. But obviously, if we counter-tariff the United States, there's so many cars that are made in the United States. Cars that you don't think are made in the United States are made in the United States. BMW builds a lot of cars there. Mercedes, Volkswagen, most of the Japanese brands are building cars in the United States. So even though you might identify a certain car with a certain country of origin, they actually might be coming from a much closer port than you'd expect.
Ben, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Elias. Speak to you soon.